Today we're going to talk about my favorite miracle in the Bible, and it is Jesus walking on water. But we're not going to really talk about Jesus a whole lot because my favorite part of the miracle is Peter. Peter, to me, is a colossal knucklehead, and I love him so much because I relate to him because I'm a knucklehead. Peter strives so much to follow Jesus and makes mistakes all over the place, and I relate to that because I trip over air all the time. So it's really nice to see that God allowed those moments of humanity and us knuckleheads to remain in the Word so that way we can have someone to relate to. We're going to start out by looking in a couple of places, but our main verses are going to be out of Matthew. And the reason for that is Jesus walking on water is written in all four Gospels. Not correct. Jesus walking on water does not happen in Luke. Peter walking on water only happens in Matthew. And that's awesome because there's four different people, four different accounts of what they saw and didn't see. Matthew was one of the 12 disciples that we anticipate was in the boat at the time of Peter exiting the boat. So that's why we think that it's only in Matthew. So if you will join with me to Matthew chapter 14, we're going to just read through it together. I'm in the NIV, so if you have different words in your version, it's okay. It's just a different version. Starting at verse 22, Jesus walks on water is my heading. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on the mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because of the wind and was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." "Lord, if it is you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," Jesus said. Then Peter got out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat and the wind died down, then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." We're going to rewind. We're going back. Verse 22. We're going to break this down because it's great to see different points of view through Scripture. And I have a different point of view because Peter's a knucklehead. So we're going to look at how he's a knucklehead in the midst of this. So, starting back at verse 22. Immediately, not like later on, immediately Jesus sent the disciples in the boat to go ahead of him. Now, Jesus had just finished feeding the 5,000. 5 loaves, 2 fish, all those people were fed. As soon as he was done, he told the disciples to go. If you've ever been in a place where you gave out free stuff, people don't generally leave quickly, right? They generally stick around to see if there's any leftovers so they can get more free stuff. So in my mind, I'm thinking Jesus sent the disciples to go, and Jesus is still hanging around. There's people still wanting to talk to him, even though he's dismissed the crowd. I'm assuming that it didn't happen like that. It wasn't one of Jesus' miracles that he said, "You are dismissed," and they flooded out of there, right? People still hung around. So after that, Jesus then finally has time to be by himself. I love this about Jesus is that he always goes and finds a place to be with the Lord. I'm going to be honest, I struggle with that. How many of us here have a long day at work, get home, and we're like, all right, I need my 10 minutes with Jesus? So it's just all something that we need to really schedule and focus on putting dedication into our daily lives and spending time with Jesus. So it's super important that we're able to see that in our own lives, because we're going to get so much more out of it. After that, we go to the end of verse 23. He was there alone. Our special place where we hang out with Jesus shouldn't be with like 6 kids running around us, our dogs wrestling. It really needs to be like us and Jesus, right? It's how we get refilled after a long day. Verse 24, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land. So we got this storm, blowing wind. This boat, they're rocking, they're tipping, they're trying to stand, and they're rowing, right? So they have these gentlemen in this boat working their butts off to stay afloat. They're scared, they're exhausted, they just helped feed 5,000 people, but now they're fighting this storm. In verse 26 it says, shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them on the lake. Okay, so Jesus sent them in a boat, then dismissed the crowds, and they're in a storm. So they've been out there for potentially 6 to 9 hours rowing and fighting a storm. I get tired after like 10 rows, guys. So I can't imagine how tired these guys are and how frustrated and freaking out they are because they're just dudes in a boat. And then all of a sudden, there's a person walking towards them. 26 says, when the disciples saw him walking on the water, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. All right, let's think about this for just a second, okay? They were sent out by Jesus to go onto this water. And now they're tired, they got a lot going on in their head, and they see something coming towards them. Why would they not think it was Jesus? Well, let's rewind. If you go back to Matthew 4, where Jesus calms the storms, the disciples were running, trying to get Jesus to wake up, right? Do you want us to die, pretty much? We're going to drown. No. So they wake him up, and Jesus calms the storm. But here, they're not seeking Jesus. They're not looking, they're not anticipating Jesus to come out to them on the water. They're just freaking out because there's a dude walking towards them on the water. They weren't anticipating Jesus to come to them. So I have a question for you to ponder. Are you anticipating Jesus? Are you anticipating him coming to you during your day at work, when your kids are fighting? Are you anticipating him through his word to move in your heart and to change you? Might be a little easier if we made a little more time for him, huh? The Lord moves. Are you ready? Back at it, verse 27. Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." Jesus gives 2 of my favorite commands right here. Take courage. Take courage is in Scripture 116 times. And then he says, "It is I." And then he says, "Do not be afraid." Do not be afraid is in Scripture 70 times. And that is without including any time that it says, "Do not have fear." Okay, 116, 70 times. I love how God is such a gracious Father that he repeats himself over and over and over again. Because I have to repeat myself with my daughter over and over and over again. And he gives it to us. He's just that loving dad that we don't listen very well. And he continues to tell us over and over again, take courage, do not be afraid. I love that he repeats things to me because sometimes I hear it and I'm like, well, I'm going to act like I didn't hear that and move on. So Listen. Verse 28. Lord, if it is you, Peter replied. Knucklehead! Who else would it be? I don't understand Peter's thought process here. Okay? Dude walking on water. You've been hanging out with this man for how long? You've seen how many miracles, like you just finished witnessing a miracle, feeding 5,000. And you're like, Lord, if it's you, knucklehead moment right there. Use some common sense, Peter. Love him. I do. I love Peter. I just have to laugh at the fact that he's questioning Jesus there. But don't we question Jesus all the time? Do we question him of like, Lord, why didn't you give me that miracle? Or why did you give that person their miracle? We question Jesus all the time. But here, it's like he's right in front of you, and you're questioning him. Come on, Peter. 29. Jesus says one word. Come. Okay? I'm going to enact this a little bit for you. Got to take the sandals off, because who knows if Peter had them on or off. But Peter pauses for just a second. Peter's a fisherman. Fishermen don't walk on water. They pull fish out of water, right? Okay? Otherwise, like, he would just be walking around. Oop, got a fish. Doesn't happen that way. So this is what I'm envisioning with Peter. Peter gets very Bruce Almighty-like, gets out of the boat, and he's like, all right, I'm there. I got it. And he's going towards Jesus. But then he gets distracted. The wind kicks up. The waves are in front of him. And he loses his focus. Peter sinks. And when we lose our focus off Jesus, we generally sink as well. But in that moment of desperation, Peter says, Lord, save me. And instantly, Jesus reaches out and saves Peter, pulls him back into the boat. Aren't we all knuckleheads sometimes? We all take our eyes off Jesus. We all get distracted by the things that we have to do and the people around us. And we lose our focus. And we sink. But we know all we have to do is say, Lord, save me. And he's right there, immediately, every time. God's so good, so good. Verse 30, but when we already went past that. Anyways, verse 30 was when the wind kicked up. Verse 32, and when he climbed back into the boat, the wind died down, and those who were in the boat worshipped him. Truly, you are the Son of God. But here's the thing, they worship because this is the first time that is documented that the disciples worshipped Jesus as the Son of God. But the disciples in the boat, they saw and had faith. Peter, in his boldness, he had that instantaneous request of, can I come to you on the water? That he got to experience God's power firsthand. Peter had faith and stepped out in that faith. And in those moments, that's when we see Jesus closest. Peter may be a knucklehead, but none of the other guys got out of the boat. Peter's the only one that had faith and went for it. So this morning, I just ask that you fix your eyes on Jesus, stay focused, find time to be with him, and allow yourself to be a knucklehead because Jesus saves us every time.